Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this session this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are. We will get started on the hour, wherever you are. So just in a couple of minutes, so 3 minutes, we will get started with the webinar. Welcome to those of you that have just joined in. Thank you so much for your time today and for attending today. We will get started in 1 minute. We will start exactly on the hour. This will be recorded. I will mention all of this again in a moment, but just for those of you that have just joined, welcome to the webinar on the GPSR. I have just put in the chat an email in case you're facing any difficulties. Hopefully you can hear and see everything perfectly. If not, let us know in the chat, and hopefully the chat function is working. So you can just test it by saying hello if you'd like to. And then we have an email in there for you to, if you want to speak to ICW direct, you can send them an email, or if you're having any difficulties, you can email them also. So just a few options for you. Okay, we will get started. Okay, so welcome. Hi, thank you so much for your time. I know that we're all so busy. We are very excited to do this webinar. I am really excited to see this webinar because Rutger has basically saved me the trouble of having to read the regulation, which is always a joy for me. As much as I love reading legislation, it's just nicer if someone can put it in perspective and give you some ideas on what this really means for you. And hopefully we're going to do that today. We only have 45 minutes. I think Rutger and I have spoken about this longer than 45 minutes, definitely, before today. So we can talk about this for hours and hours, but we've just got 45 minutes. So please do put any questions in the chat. We will try our best to answer them. If you just want to test the chat, thank you so much there for putting that in the chat. It is being recorded, so I won't mention any names, but hi, thank you so much for just checking that the chat works. So it's great, it works. Any questions, put them in there and we will try and address them today, but we are limited on time. So I promise you, if we don't get to answer those in this session, we will contact you and answer those questions that you have. Your line should be muted. If for some reason it manages to unmute, please do make sure that it is muted. As I've mentioned, it's being recorded, which is great. And the very efficient ICW team will send out the recording in the next couple of days, hopefully by next week. So you will be able to see the recording or perhaps share with colleagues who haven't been able to make it this morning. Also put the email, as I've put in the chat, it's here on the slide as well for anyone who wants to contact ICW directly or is facing any difficulties. Okay, so let me introduce myself really quickly before I pass over to the main star of the show, Rutger, in a moment. So my name is Geraldine Cosh. I'm an independent product safety consultant based here in London, in the UK. I've been working as a product safety consultant for approximately 20 years. I've trained many participants and I thoroughly enjoy every training session I do because I really do learn something every time, and I'm sure I will today. Just some current activities that I work on. I have been working on the ROSPA, which is the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents Injury Data Collection project, which is sponsored by the Office of Product Safety and Standards here in the UK. I'm obsessed with data, and it's why I love the ICW team and what they do, because they really help understand what to do with your data, how to analyze it, and more importantly, how to communicate it clearly to others as well. And I know that Rutger's going to be talking about injury data later on as well, so I'm super excited to hear more about that. I'm also the technical author for a number of PASs. A few of these will be mentioned as well later on. Rutger's going to mention them, and I'll put the links in the chat for those of you that want to read more about it. And I've also worked on a number of EU projects. If anyone's got any questions, then do let me know about that. But I'm going to pass over to Rutger, who's going to talk about the GPSR.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. Just a radio check, video check, everything is working. So then, once again, thank you very much, Geraldine, and also the ICW for hosting this webinar. Just a few words about myself for those who don't know me. I'm a lawyer by education, legal counsel, and with more than 20 years of legal experience. A large part of my career has been built as head of legal at Shimano Europe. I guess most of you will know or have heard of the name Shimano. It's well known for the bicycle components, but also fishing tackle equipment. And since 2021, I've started my own venture called Recall Desk. And with Recall Desk, we are a one-stop shop for services and advice relating to product safety, compliance, and recalls. And also areas that are closely related to those areas, like, for example, consumer law and distribution law. I think what makes Recall Desk unique is that we are tailoring our services to the needs of the customer. Proud to say that Recall Desk is a partner of the World Federation of the Sporting Goods Industry. I'm also proud to be a writer and contributor to a number of publications like Bike Europe, and Sporting Goods Intelligence Europe and Eyewear Intelligence. I'm a member of the Dutch standard body committee for cargo bikes, and I'm also a member of the OPSS Business Reference Panel in the UK. Before I start the presentation, I would like to briefly explain the EU legal framework for product safety in a simplified way. So I hope that by doing this, the participants are able to put this webinar a little bit into the right context. We have the EU General Product Safety Directive. Abbreviation is GPSD. And the GPSD, the directive, is a safety net. The General Product Safety Directive applies to consumer products when there are no specific provisions with the same objective in the rules of EU law governing the safety of the products concerned. So the harmonized legislation. That can be totally if there is no sector legislation, or residually in case there is sectoral legislation. Then there is specific union harmonization legislation, and it provides detailed safety requirements for specific product categories, aiming to harmonize safety requirements across the EU. And then we have safety standards, and they are developed by standardization bodies, providing technical specifications and guidelines for product safety. Safety standards are voluntary, but compliance with them may help manufacturers to demonstrate that their products meet the applicable safety requirements. It is important to highlight that product safety law functions as a regulatory system wherein public regulators play a significant role. And this is different with, for example, product liability law, although product liability law strongly relates to product safety law. So this is just in a simplified way how the EU legal framework for product safety looks like. Now, the outline of this webinar, the GPSD, the Product Safety Directive, as just shown in the previous slide, is pretty old, stemming from 2001, and it will be replaced by the EU General Product Safety Regulation. And that's where this webinar will be about. The text has been adopted by the EU Council on April the 25th and is expected to come into force by end of next year. So it's 18 months after it has been officially gone through all the formalities that are needed to have it finally approved, but it's expected that it will be by end of next year. So pretty soon. I believe that the GPSR will be a game changer for companies selling consumer goods in the EU. And in this presentation, I will highlight what I believe are the main aspects and critical points of the General Product Safety Regulation. And I have listed those topics here, where each topic is basically just one slide. So here you can see the topics. I will spend a few words on the form, the scope, and the position of the regulation. I will explain briefly why I believe the regulation is going mental. A few words about the importance of risk assessment pre-market. I will answer the question if a QR code will be accepted as a single means of sharing product information with consumers. There will be a very important role for providers of online platforms. There will be requirements for traders that are established outside the EU selling their products in the EU. There will be obligations in case of online sales. And here you have it, Geraldine already mentioned it. There will be an accident reporting duty. Product safety processes, internal product safety processes for companies will be compulsory. Recall remedies. There are detailed provisions with regards to recall remedies. And the snag. There is a snag, which I believe not many people have spotted. I will explain what I believe is the snag. There will be possibilities for consumers to file complaints, and there will be penalties. Now, of course, the relevance of a specific topic may differ per person or company. But for me, personally, a webinar is successful, even if there are just a few key takeouts that are useful for me. And I hope this webinar may also be useful for you. So let's get really started now. To start with, the GPSR is a regulation and not a directive. A regulation, the difference is that the regulation has direct effect in all EU member states without the intervention of national legislators, where a directive needs to be transposed into national law and often allows member states to include deviating provisions, which obviously jeopardizes the single market principle. With a regulation, that is no longer possible. So the provisions of the regulations apply in full in all member states. The scope, it's called the General Product Safety Regulation, but it's remarkable how many detailed and specific provisions are included in the GPSR. Normally, EU law is intentionally vague, and they basically expect to have EU law fleshed out by courts. And also, or they explain how to interpret EU law by, for example, by publishing guidelines. But it's remarkable to see that the GPSR is really pretty clear and specific on some topics, which on one hand is commendable, but on the other hand, that can be tricky, as I will explain later on in this presentation. as a note, perhaps good to also know that the food imitation products will be covered by the regulation repealing directive that is currently dealing with those products. Yeah, like the directive, the GPSD, the regulation is also a safety net. But as I mentioned, since it contains so many detailed and specific provisions, I call it a safety net plus. And yeah, I will explain it also later on in the presentation why that is.
Just a quick question, Rutger, if that's okay, on the previous thing
Sure.
to clarify this. So the question is, they're not really clear if the GPSR is already published or there's still changes to come. So do you think it's likely there'll be changes now?
No, there will be no
period?
changes. The text has been finally approved now. So there will not be any changes anymore. No. And it's published. The text is published. So yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, why the GPSR is going mental. Yeah, it's remarkable to see that the GPSR refers to the World Health Organization's definition of health, which is health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So this means that the term product safety takes on a much broader meaning and a whole new dimension. And I've put in some examples of recalls that happened in the recent past, because I think this may explain what this could mean in practice. So in the Netherlands, last year, there was a company that produced a new line of crockery with typical Dutch icons like skates, windmills, wooden shoes, etc., etc. But it also showed a smiling Anne Frank on it, holding her diary. And there has been quite some criticism on that, obviously. No need to explain that. So yeah, the company decided to recall this product line from the market. Another example is this one, which I found interesting to share. There were some parents complaining about a phallic-shaped toy produced by a play clay company you probably heard of. I mean, you can decide for yourself whether you, as a parent, would have problems with this product. But yeah, the message here really on this slide is that based now on the new and a broad interpretation that the GPSR uses for safety and health, yeah, we may expect more of these types of recalls. And also, it's interesting because the GPSR also requires companies to take health into consideration when they are carrying out a risk assessment. And that is what the next slide will be about. So compared to the GPSD, the directive, the GPSR pays much more attention to risk assessment. And yeah, unless already covered by union harmonization legislation, the GPSR prescribes that manufacturers must carry out an internal risk analysis and draw up technical documentation. So in other words, in most cases, a manufacturer of consumer goods will have to carry out a risk assessment and prepare technical documentation before a product is put on the market. Now, in line with the previous slide about health, it is remarkable and should be noted that mental health must also be included in that risk assessment. And an example given in the GPSR is digital connected products, in particular if they are used by vulnerable consumers like children. So, a QR code. There has been a strong lobby for some time, at least in Europe, in order to basically make sure that the QR code would be a sufficient means for manufacturers to share product information like manuals, safety warnings, what have you, with the consumers, with the end users, instead of using the thick multilingual manuals, have so much text on either a product or its packaging, and for obvious reasons. But unfortunately, based on the GPSR, it is still not allowed to use a QR code as a replacement of that. Of course, you can use it additionally, but you cannot use it as a single means. And yeah, just to emphasize that whatever information you want to share with consumers, if it's safety related, you should do that in the language that can be understood by the end users. So unfortunately, QR code not yet accepted as single means. Yes, an entirely new section has been included in the GPSR with obligations for providers of online platforms. And this seems to be a real game changer for both providers of online platforms, but also for all economic operators who sell products, for example, through online platforms. Now, although providers of online platforms are not liable for the compliance and safety of the products themselves sold through their platform, they must ensure through, which is really a battery of due diligence obligations, that traders using their platform only sell products that comply with applicable safety laws and regulations. If traders want to sell their products via Amazon or the like, they should be in control of their product compliance and safety processes. And in case of repeated non-compliance, pursuant to the GPSR, providers of online platforms will have to suspend their services to this trader until further notice. So this makes providers of online platforms, de facto a new or an extra gatekeeper when it comes to product compliance and safety. And I believe since most traders sell products through online platforms, this could have quite a tremendous impact, but also hopefully a positive impact on the level of product compliance and safety. Yes, traders outside the EU selling directly to the EU should establish in the EU. This is already the case for many products that are covered by sectoral legislation, but now it is also clear that it applies to all consumer products that are covered by the GPSR. And as a consequence, companies established outside the EU cannot sell directly to consumers in the EU through online channels without having a representative in the EU. And the representative established in the EU will be the person or company to be addressed if products do not comply with the EU legislation. Yeah, and taking this further to provisions in the GPSR with regard to online sales. If you are established outside the EU and selling online to consumers in the EU, the offer of products shall indicate who is that responsible person in the EU. Of course, if the manufacturer is already established in the EU, then that should be the name and the details that should be indicated in the offer. But also in case you're not established, you should point out who is your representative in the EU. Yeah, perhaps also good to know that that the offer should also indicate any warning or safety information, and that should again be in a language which can be easily understood by consumers, as determined by the member state in which the product is made available on the market. There are more obligations, but I thought I'd just highlight these two.
Just to clarify, Rutger, if that's okay, we've had two questions that relate to professional users. I know you mentioned consumers. I don't know if that's simple to answer, but they're wondering, they believe this is excluded, that the GPSR is excluded for professional use, so for business to business?
Yes, it is. To give a black and white answer, it is aimed at consumers, but there can be circumstances if, for example, it can be expected of it, or if it's foreseeable that the product will also be used by consumers, then it will also impact that specific product. So black and white, yes, but there are always exceptions to the case. So, but the easy answer is yes, the GPSR is really aiming at, is really applicable to selling to consumers. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I was typing it, but yeah, I think that does. And hopefully, please, those that asked, do add more if we didn't answer your question. But thanks, Rutger. Perfect.
Yeah. So yes, here we have it. Geraldine already referred to it. In the USA, there is already a duty to report incidents or accidents. And there will be a similar kind of duty with the introduced now with the GPSR. In very short, there will be an obligation for manufacturers to report without undue delay accidents or incidents caused by products they have placed on the market. Accidents are defined as occurrences that resulted in an individual's death or in serious adverse effects on their health and safety. And the report must be made to the competent market surveillance authority of the member state where the accident or incident occurred. And besides the manufacturer, also importers and distributors play an important role because they must report accidents to the manufacturer. So this is really new, and yeah, we'll have to see how this will impact or will have an impact on companies selling products into in the EU. Yes, in order to prevent the placing on the market of dangerous products, the GPSR mentions that it should be compulsory for economic operators to include in their production or marketing activities internal processes ensuring compliance with the relevant requirements of the regulation. But then, it leaves it to the economic operator how to do that. And on the how, it refers to, by example, for example, organizational procedures, guidelines, or standards. To give some more context to that, or tips or tricks, companies seeking to enhance their product safety and recall processes can consider using two ISO standards that are not widely known. It's ISO 10377 on product safety and ISO 10393 on product recalls. Now, both large and small businesses can use these standards. You can use it to evaluate and enhance your product safety procedures throughout the product development, production, and distribution. The key messages of these standards is really that product defects can be avoided. For those who are interested, Recall Desk has developed a quick scan based on these ISO standards, and feel free to reach out to me if you would like to know more about that. The UK is unique, I believe, and actively promotes PAS 7050 and PAS 7100, as already mentioned by Geraldine. And she knows all about it. And also, Geraldine, you give training on a very regular basis, what these standards are about and how companies are able to use them. And they are free of charge. So I'm really advertising here for you, Geraldine. I think it's really great what you're doing with that. And it's really useful for companies if they want to know more about product safety procedures. But feel free, Geraldine, to comment on this.
Yeah, thanks to OPSS, the Office of Product Safety and Standards we have here in the UK. And I've put the links in the chat, and I think the ISO links are very useful as well. And what you're doing is great. So we've got there's lots of help and support to help everybody.
Great. So in case there is a recall in the unfortunate case, but we all know that it can happen. It's reality. The GPSR stipulates that consumers should be given a choice of at least 2 of the following remedies: repair, replacement, or a refund. This is new. Having said that, only one remedy is okay if the other remedies are impossible or disproportionate. And this obviously leads to a discussion about what is meant by disproportionate. And I often make a comparison with the car industry, where repair seems, the only proportionate remedy. We can all understand that, perhaps with some exceptions, that a replacement or a refund for a car that can be repaired would be disproportionate. But to give you another example, I assisted a client with a recall of very high-end e-bikes worth many thousands of euros. And the CPSC in the US actually required my client, they asked my client to seriously consider giving a refund to its customers instead of repair. So, and it took quite some efforts to finally convince the CPSC that repair was clearly and obviously the more obvious and proportionate remedy. And moreover, I think there's also a sustainability element here, because repair is in most cases the better option. And also with the new EU proposal on the right to repair for consumers, it's quite remarkable that a minimum of 2 remedies must be offered for recalls, while repair is clearly in most, or at least in many cases, the most proportionate and sustainable remedy. But you should be prepared for this, and it will depend on a case-by-case basis to consider what is the most proportionate remedy. The snag, beware of the snag. Let me share you first the snag. So the GPSR mandates that in the event of a recall, the consumer must be instructed to immediately stop using the affected product. And in addition to that, in the event of a recall, the GPSR mandates that the economic operator must collect the unsafe product from the consumer if it's not portable. Now, if we take this literally, the consequences can be huge. And I discussed this with the EU Commission, and long story short, they basically confirmed that this interpretation is correct. So you should take this literally. So then I asked them, how about a car? And then it seems more difficult for them to give a clear answer. First, they said cars are not covered by the GPSR, which is not true. Cars are covered. And then they said, but these conditions do not apply to cars since recalls are already covered by sectoral car legislation. But the question is whether that is a true statement, whether that is correct. The GPSR literally says that provisions concerning, among other remedies for consumers, as well as product safety recalls, should apply to products covered by union harmonization legislation to the extent that there are no specific provisions but the same objective in that harmonization legislation. Now, since the GPSR is so specific and detailed on how recalls should be managed, this is not covered by sectoral legislation, and therefore I believe they also apply to, among others, cars. So this can have a huge impact on how recalls should be managed, in particular recalls for heavy products that should be collected from a consumer if it's not portable. And yeah, at this moment, I'm still in discussion with the EU Commission, still waiting for a clear answer. So I can only say to be continued. But yeah, it's I think it can have an enormous impact on how recalls should be managed as soon as the GPSR comes into force. Then the Union Rapid Information System, as it's now called, it was previously known as RAPEX. It will be modernized to enable more efficient corrective measures to be taken across the EU. And one of the aims is to make it easier to inform the public about possible issues, but also to enable consumers to submit complaints. And that will be also be public. So manufacturers and their reputation for product quality and safety will be more exposed. If your name is mentioned, your product is mentioned, and there are complaints with regard to your product and it's public, you can imagine that you are exposed. Penalties, the GPSR introduces penalties for those who violate the GPSR. In the directive, penalties are also mentioned, but it's left still to individual member states to implement or introduce penalties. So this is so this may differ from one member state to the other, and in the GPSR that will be now applied to the entire EU. We still do not know what the penalties will be, but it's expected that they will play a significant effect for economic operators. But today, still not known exactly what the penalties will be. We are going pretty fast, I must say, because we're already at the last slide, key takeouts.
I have lots of questions to ask you, so don't worry.
Okay.
We're not letting you get off.
Okay. Yeah, for the key takeouts, I would say one of the key takeouts is that the GPSR will be relevant for all consumer products, even if covered by sectoral legislation. And the other one is that I believe the GPSR will really be a game changer for companies selling consumer products in the EU. With only 18 months to go, be prepared for that. And in that sense, I hope that this webinar has been useful for you. And in case you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, feel free to do so by using either this email address or my mobile phone number. Wow, we're already
Thank you so much for that. That was so interesting. And I didn't want to interrupt you because there's quite a few questions coming in. I just wanted to wait until you got to the end. And I think another point, I guess, another takeaway is that there's probably a few things that need clarification, and that some of these questions I ask you may need that. But when you spoke earlier on about the address and the information on the product, we've got a question here. So the electronic address, is that the phone number or email address? And kind of related to that, someone's asking, do I understand well that the website address is now mandatory as traceability information on the product, where the GPSD, the address was enough? So do you know any more about that, the address information, or what needs to be on there? Is there anything within
that hasn't really changed, I believe, in comparison with the directive. So you still need to have the details of, for example, the manufacturer on either the product or in the packaging, or so that hasn't really changed. This is really related to the QR code, so I guess, right? So in terms of what has to be mentioned on the product, the packaging, or in the manual, that has not really changed. Okay, yeah.
Perfect. And let me just go through some. So there has been two questions actually about So yeah, I hope that addresses your questions. If not, please do add another one into the chat or on the Q&A function, and we'll make sure we'll get in contact with you so that you've understood if we can help you further as well. A few people have asked about risk assessment. So one specific question here is, how does it apply to simple consumer products like t-shirts or football? And and I can answer on that as well. And then there was another question. Someone's asked very generically about the risk assessment method to carry out the risk assessment set out by the GPSR. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, and then I could add some after.
Yeah, of course, with doing a risk assessment, you should take into consideration the risk of the product, the risk that the product may pose. So if it's a simple product that typically does not in a foreseeable way poses any risk, then there's no need to do a risk assessment, so to speak. So it really depends on the type of product and the risks that it may pose. So there is proportionality there that should be considered. With regards to the method, that really depends on the product. There is no method explained in the GPSR. There is harmonized legislation that is in some cases mandating what kind of method should be used, but it really depends on, there's a variety of risk assessment methodologies in the market, and it really depends on the product and the risk, what could be a suitable method to be applied. Yeah, so I cannot really answer that question specifically. Yeah, if you have any other thoughts or additional thoughts on that, Geraldine.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I highly recommend downloading the PAS 7100, because I tried my best to simplify what's known as the RAG, which is Decision 2019-417. So that's in the back of PAS 7100. So I highly recommend downloading that. And then in the UK, there was the PRISM methodology was released very recently, but they actually complement each other. They're not massively different. And it is tricky because that's post-risk assessment, but I do think that the principles of the post-risk assessment methodology can be used pre-risk assessment. And that example in the Toy Safety Directive, where it really just wants you to go through the hazards that might be on the product and how have you mitigated or have you identified it. And for me, the key thing is about documentation. It doesn't really matter how you've done it. If you've documented that, that's really key. And there are standards out there that can help you. So with a t-shirt, for example, hopefully it wouldn't have draw cords on it, but just making sure that the size, the fit, all of these things have been taken into consideration. Is there anything, you mentioned the mental health thing, right? Is there any sort of picture or graphic on there? Because I've seen recalls where there are graphics on t-shirts and they've had to do that because the graphics were not the best choice at the time. So just considering all these things, but I think documenting it, that you've done it. So if it's just a one-pager saying, we reviewed it in a team meeting, this is what we did, we've addressed it by, it was okay, it was signed off, whatever you do. I think that's my only recommendation on risk assessment. And we'll hopefully do an ICW webinar on risk assessment later in the year. So we'll keep you updated about that. But that's my thoughts, quite long thoughts probably, because my favorite subject, risk assessment. So some other questions that came in when you mentioned the accident reporting duty, which I absolutely love. I know that's extra things for some people to consider. In the US, they already do this, but there's a specific question about serious adverse effects. And I think, it's a great question. But on your slide 15, so accidents are defined as occurrences that resulted in an individual's death. I think that's clear what that is. Or in serious adverse effects. Is that defined? I'm assuming the answer is no. Or what do you think?
The answer is
that?
no.
No. Yeah.
You have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis, and probably also here risk assessment could be helpful in order to determine if there is if the product is posing a serious risk. But there is no simple answer to that question, and it should be handled on a case-by-case basis. And there has been quite some discussions in the drafting phase of the text, where I think in the beginning the text was a bit more clear on, for example, when you needed to report it, and there was not really any room for proportionality. I think by using this language, they've tried to build in some proportionality, because it may take some time for companies to actually figure out if there is something wrong with the product, and if so, what could be the potential risk. And yeah, I mean, this is also typically what you do is do a risk assessment. Very practically, if you have a warranty or complaint system, you need to monitor that system. You can see that perhaps one product is quite a number of complaints are reported with regard to a specific product. Then you should start taking action. For example, if one of the reports is that a consumer had an accident or an incident with that product, you should really take that seriously and assess whether that product has a defect that is requiring action and or need to be reported. So really case by case. And yeah, I think risk assessment is one of the key elements in that process.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking out loud, and in my opinion, maybe perhaps the risk assessment guidelines of decision 2019-417 I mentioned, they have 4 levels of injury or harm. They have level 1, which is the minor one, and then level 4, which is death or, similar kind of thing. That's how they've defined it. And I wonder if it will be on that level 4 side is what they're really talking about, because there are, consequences that are just as severe, and they've defined that as a level 4. Perhaps that's something they're trying to allude to.
Yes, I think that is helpful. On the other hand, I should also emphasize that if there is a accident or incident, that does not necessarily mean that you have to recall the product from the market. It's just that the authority wants to know if something has happened to the product. So in that sense, it's not the same process that you would do in case you want to answer the question if a recall is needed. But for sure, risk assessment to some extent will be needed.
Yeah, and it's tricky because, and this whole the kind of mental psychological side of it is really interesting, and we've been following that for a while, and it's really tricky because we've got quite a few guidelines out that can help us with physical mechanical injuries and what they mean, but I do think the mental psychological side is really tricky, and I think hopefully more to come on that in the in time. But this is not new, this accident reporting, in terms of this is what the US you're expected to do, right, for the CPSC. I think Health Canada are similar as well, and I think it's about communication and information sharing, right? Exactly like you say, it's not about you have to do a recall if you've had an accident. It's not that, it's about just sharing information.
Yes, and speaking of the CPSC, they are getting more and more aggressive on the requirement to report an incident or accident, and we just have to wait and see how the EU is dealing with this reporting duty. But looking at the US, they are getting very aggressive towards companies that have not followed that duty, that did not follow their duty to inform them. So watch this space. Right, well, we're 45 minutes are done. That went so quick. Thank you so much, Rutger. I know that we have other questions. I will note them down, and I'll make sure that I'll contact you directly. So if it has come through, there was one anonymous actually, but I think we addressed that. But if there's any that's come through anonymous, if you could please put your name, or if you can email your question to the email address I put at the beginning, we will make sure that we answer that question and address that question. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week. Thank you so much, Rutger. Thank you all for joining this webinar, and thank you, Geraldine and ICW, and that's it. Thank you.
Just a quick reminder, I'm going to put the form in a reminder, but I already put it in earlier on. If you can fill out the feedback form, that would be really appreciated. So thank you all so much. Oh, this is nice. We get thank you messages and claps.
Yes.
Okay.
So, thanks.